in series wiring, voltage adds up and amperage remains the same. And in parallel wiring, amperage adds up and voltage remains the same. Where is this really important? Well, that's in the combiner box, where you're taking multiple circuits of something and bringing it down to one larger thing. And that could be multiple circuits of batteries, bringing it down to one output. That could be multiple circuits of solar and bringing it down to one output. I ran into a design flaw where the customer kind of designed and installed their own system based on the advice of various vendors along the way. They went to SolarEdge, and SolarEdge said you need this many modules and this many optimizers. And then they went to Midnight, and Midnight said, well, if you have this many modules, you need this many circuits. They need to be combined in a combiner box. And the customer then went and bought what they thought were the right breakers for the combiner box. And they didn't realize things like, well, the SolarEdge inverter has terminals for each circuit, and you should be landing the circuits directly onto the terminals of the SolarEdge system and not use any kind of combining to begin with. The basics of combining say that when you are combining multiple circuits together, you need disconnects and over circuit protection. And sometimes in the disconnect switches, you have fuses that provide the over circuit protection. A breaker on an electric service panel, the breaker is the overcurrent protection. So when you're combining all of the circuits in your home together in parallel, you're putting them on breakers, and that's your disconnect switch as well as your overcurrent protection. When you're combining multiple batteries together in parallel, you need to think, well, where are my disconnect switches for this? And what is my overcurrent protection for this? And so if you're taking your solar arrays into a combiner box, and the combiner box only has a disconnect switch, it doesn't have any fuses inside, there are products to put these battery fuses and solar fuses in line so that you only need to land on a disconnect switch down the road. So sometimes with these components, it can be difficult to find a fused disconnect switch that is exactly what you need. Let's say you're building a custom battery box and you're finding yourself needing a 300 amp fuse. Finding a 300 amp DC breaker is going to be very difficult. Finding a 300 amp fuse, not so difficult. And so separating the fuse from the switch can be worthwhile. But the point is, whenever you have parallel wired circuits, they need to have overcurrent protection and fuses. So you may be tapping line side taps onto line side conductors, and then within the tap connector where you have multiple circuits coming in together, you might be saying, well, there's no fuses and there's no disconnect switches in my tap connectors that are all coming together. And the answer is, well, that's okay, because further up the line, these tap connectors are landing on fused disconnect switches or landing on service panel breakers. So they don't need that disconnect or overcurrent protection at the tap itself because it's immediately on the line elsewhere. So when you're designing these systems, just be aware that in series wiring, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, that's just one circuit, and you're making these connections, without overcurrent protection or disconnects. But once you start going into parallel circuit wiring, you need inline fuses and disconnects.